Let's unpack this with Ovigwe Eguegu. He's a policy advisor and co-founder of Afripolitika and is speaking to us from Ankara. Thanks so much for joining us on this news hour. So Joe Biden's handling of relations with so many countries in Africa is widely different to the way that we saw Trump almost have no relations with African countries. But do you think the Biden administration is trying to play catch-up here in the face of Russian and Chinese influence on the continent?
Well, yes, I think it's very important to understand that the U.S. interest or increase in interest in Africa must be seen in that light of great power competition. And it's also important to point that when we talk about U.S. influence declining in African countries or in Africa generally, it's not just because there's been a rise in engagement between Africa and China or other countries. Bilateral relations have been poor. And for instance, if you look at U.S. exports to Africa, it was 27 billion, just by 2021. But if you go back to 2014, it was 38 billion. Two-way trade, it stands at 64 billion as at 2021. But if you go back to 2008, it was 141 billion. So clearly, without talking about China or Russia or other countries, U.S.-Africa relations needed a lot of work. And even though Trump when he came into office, he put up the Prosper Africa initiative, President Biden knows as well that there need to be serious effort in regards to trade and investment, because that is where you really get economies to really get connected. And that's why we're seeing this MOU that has been signed between the United States and Africa Free Trade Area Secretariat.
Ovigwe, before this summit began, you tweeted, "It needs stating that this democratic recession matters for U.S.-Africa strategy." So firstly, what is the democratic recession in Africa that you speak of, and why does it matter for relations with the U.S.?
So yeah, that tweet came after Afrobarometer, which is a very reputable polling organization, did a poll and just published its result. One of the findings is that there's a decrease in satisfaction with democracy. And that dissatisfaction, for instance, is in figures. So 39% of Africans today are satisfied with democracy. In 2014, that number was 45%. And also, we're seeing an increase in Africans who seem to be more empathetic towards military rule. And the reason we're seeing this is because democracy has not really delivered the promises that they've come to be communicated to the African population. And there's this, people conflate good governance with democracy. And that is because of how it has been promoted to the African continent. But we have democracy, electoral democracies. My country's democracy. There are several elections that will be held next year on the continent. But the elections come and go, but the problems still remain the same. And that's why there needs to be an emphasis on good governance, because there are cases of examples of countries that are not quote unquote electoral democracies in the way that the United States and Western Europe tries to define it, but are very successful. You have Singapore, for instance, you have Vietnam, you have China, you have the Gulf countries. So there are these are the kinds of trends that is causing African countries to think the way they are. And the significance for U.S. foreign policy is that when the U.S. comes to Africa with a strategy to counter China and emphasizes on promotion of democracy, there are less and less people on the continent that are going to be inspired by that narrative, because they just don't feel the impact of democracy the way the U.S. promises them.
Ovigwe Eguegu, live to us there from Ankara. Appreciate your analysis. Thank you so much.